Welcome to the Irth podcast. I'm Jason Adams, your host. Today I'm joined by Ron Peterson, the Executive Director of NOLCA. So Ron, please tell me about the organization NOLCA and your role, and then let's talk a little bit about the letter that you recently published.
Okay, sounds good. So NOLCA is an organization. It was founded in 1994, and it was an organization of contract locating companies. At that time, there were 12 to 15 of those, what we thought were large companies, 600 to 1,000 locators. Flash forward here now, my largest locating member has 12,000 locators. So the dynamic has changed. We were the National Utility Locating Contractors Association. Well, over time, we kind of had to morph a little bit because these companies kept growing and growing, and then there was the advent of private locating industry. So we have more by number of companies. We have more private locate companies than we do contracts. So we just became NOLCA, representing utility locating professionals. We have in-house locators, we have gas companies, run the gamut of locators, and of course we still have our contract locating companies. I got involved as a technician in 1996 with NOLCA, went on the board in 2003. In 2009, after we fired our executive director, I excused myself to go to the restroom, and when I came back, I was the executive director. That is not a joke. That actually happened that way. But they asked me to take it on, and I've been there ever since. So
Wow.
It's been quite the journey.
Yeah.
One of the things, having been in the industry so long, locators, I've always said this, locators always get recognition in the negative. Not a lot of people out there going, hey man, you did a great job today. It's no, you missed that, or you're late to this and that. And the problem really got exacerbated here over the last really few years with these whole broadband overbuilds and what's coming with BEAD. The dirt reports have come back with late locates being a really big issue. Well, that kind of got us thinking, everybody thinks, oh, it's just the locators not showing up. And there's so many dynamics to what constitutes a late locate. So we felt it very important to start pointing that out. Candidly, it wasn't anything that hasn't been said before.
Right.
Maybe not as a combined set of points to make. And also the locators haven't been saying that publicly. But we also had to, in doing the paper, we had to, how would we say, we're not going to point at everybody else unless we've looked in the mirror and pointed at ourselves first. Nice. So that was a very important factor, is recognize our own warts, and then we'll talk about what we're going to do to fix them. So that was kind of the genesis of the thing. There are so many factors to a late locate or to the dynamic of the whole locating process.
Right.
As we say in our paper, the system came out over 50 years ago, and when they were getting 1 million locates a year, that was a big deal. Well, we have single call centers that get more than that now, and you're looking at 265 million notifications. As we say, we think the system's doing what it was not designed to do. It's just way past the design point. We need to do more, but locators need to do their part as well. So that's where it all came from.
Yeah, it's such an interesting point. The perspective we have is sitting behind the technology side of this for years, right? So, and we have a unique perspective because we did the applications for both the call center, for our contract locating clients, and as well as our facility owners, and trying to disguise the challenges of whose responsibility is. This conference for me is the first one where I've heard conversation, but I've heard a lot of people pointing fingers more than anything else. I think the conversation started because we're in I think it's the 4th year of 50% reduction in 5 years. And the question is, are we achieving our goals? I think your letter really spurred on some interesting conversations. I appreciated the fact that you took ownership in a lot of the areas, because it's hard for people to say, hey, this is my part of the challenge in the equation. I'm curious, from your perspective, late locates is an interesting one. I've heard a lot of conversations where people are saying the over notification size of these things are causing issues, especially as you kind of alluded to some of these large fiber projects that are taking place. I'm curious, you had recommended some ideas in the papers how to address these. As a technologist sitting on the other side, we're curious as well, because we say our technology can go as small as you want. If you want a 1 pixel size dig site, we can give it to you. The problem usually occurs when we start talking about liability, bad maps, and all of these other pieces that spur on the challenges of our industry. How do you see the role of the contract locator, the locator adapting technology to help solve these issues? And what can the rest of the industry, do you see, do to contribute to first recognize where their faults are And then second, how do we try to solve this thing?
Yeah, it's a multifaceted question there for sure.
Yeah.
You know, I think technology is a big part of this deal. You know, everything, you know, you've got now, and again, it's somewhat dependent on some other factors that we list in there with the quality of mapping and such, but, you know, the ability to potentially to screen out non-needed tickets, if you will. We don't need to do this one, or this is why we don't need to do that. That helps. Ticket scope is a tough nut to crack. You know, I remember back in the day in Missouri, for example, they said, well, you can't have these tickets. We need to cut these tickets down to 1,500 feet. Well, that was fine with the contractor. He just called in 10 tickets instead of one, all due at the exact same time, you know, 48 hours later. It did nothing, you know, now the people would say, well, your locator got paid, you know, 10 times now. Well, okay, but he still can't do the whole thing in 2 days. So we need, you know, that's where we need others to come in. I don't have the answer on what's a good ticket length or size, other than, you know, with the over notification piece, you know, if you know you're going to the right side of the property and you're going from pedestal to protector on the house, why do you need the back? Why do you need the whole thing? If you're doing a short-sighted service for gas, why do you need both sides of the street? I reminded in a case that I did, because I do a few of those, in which a contractor called in a 2.5-mile locate, both sides of the road and a 100-foot radius of all 15 intersections. And it was due without fail
2 days.
2 days.
Yeah.
Can't do it.
Yeah.
You know, and then after the fact, when asked, they went out and white lined their project and said, okay, we're going to work here, 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 and here. It was great. Why didn't we do that in the first place?
Yeah.
So just ticket scope itself without anything else with it, it doesn't really help a whole lot. You know, I am thoroughly aware of my own members asking for more tickets when they probably don't need to. You know, we cannot sit here and say, oh, our guys do everything right. No, we have those guys out there trying to generate revenue the wrong way. We don't want that. We just want to be able to do the work in the right way and that people get what they want. You know, you remove one of the studies that we had, wasn't our study, but it came from one of the gas clients, is they estimated up to 30% of the tickets they receive are waste.
Yeah.
You take 30% off any of my clients' workloads, suddenly we're staffed. Now, again, we are a part of our own problem, and we're not. I don't want to get past that. But if we can remove the waste from the system, if we can remove the unnecessary updates, if we can remove the non-emergencies that are called as emergencies, and if we can come to some agreement with getting what you want from our contractor friends, then the thing changes, everything changes. And I fully understand why an excavator calls in more. Part of that is the distrust that's been built between us.
Yes.
You can't overlook that. But if we can convince our contractor friends and partners that if you only ask for what you need, we'll be there, that changes a lot as well. So,
you know, I think you posted something, I believe it was in the second letter that came out, I read it recently, and one of the examples it was talking about was this over notification, and I believe something to the idea of an excavator had put in basically the same remarks on 600 tickets, and they were all, hey, I want everything located on the property and all of that. And you did the math, which I found very kind of eye-opening. It said, look, we could do this in 20 minutes, but because of what you put on the ticket, it's now taking us 40 minutes. And then when you multiply that over the stretch of it, there was a whole work day, I think a whole week of work, of unnecessary work. And one of the things that's interesting to me is the challenge where a lot of this work is getting done, but the actual physical work is not starting, right? So we've got these people calling in this work, so you're trying to kill yourself to get to it, and then you're spending too much time wasting out in the field on these other areas. The question is, who owns the responsibility of tidying this effort up? Because as a software guy, we could make it happen, right? But we started talking with our one call center clients, and they are concerned about how tight they get in the area, because they don't want to under notify, because we know the safety risk involved in that. But they also have no mechanism to challenge or check to see if the work actually beginning. So I would think in a man of your position, it's got to be frustrating to say, I'm going out to kill myself to get this done, and there's not even a crew on site for weeks until they're supposed to be done. So why am I killing myself? How do you deal with all that?
It's very tough to deal with, because we really don't know that they're not going to be there. And then they're not there. And then the next update comes in and they're not there. And again, part of it is a buildup of distrust because, you know, in fairness, we haven't been there all the time. But, and part of it is look, I've been a contractor. I called in this because I wanted to do it, but I also called in this because what happens if something happens here and I can't do it? I need to have my people working. I understand that, but I think the real key to all of this is building communication. Now we have great relationships that's been built up with a number of, NOLCA does, with a number of the contractor associations. It's not the guys at the table with us. The PCCA has been great. The you know, NUCA has been great. It's not those guys. It's the guys not at the table. We have to try to engage them. We have to try to educate them. One of the things I tell my membership a lot, we have not done a great job of educating the contracting community or really anybody, even our own clients, what it takes to do a locate. You know, they just go out there, you got to do this, you're done. It's more involved in that. So we need to do a better job of educating those folks about, you know, I used to do a training thing for contractors where I showed them the impact of a waste on a system. My specific example was I had a client that called in 5 intersections in inner city Kansas City, and they were complaining because they got one done. Well, they called in a 200-foot radius of every one of these intersections when they were working in the northeast corner in about a 20-foot span. So we went in and showed them how white lining changed their system, and magically they're getting all their locates now. They didn't understand the consequences of what their actions were. We got to do a better job at educating.
That's such a good point. When you can actually be in the field and see that if you were to white line that your marks are getting done on time, it's a reward factor that actually makes the system move forward.
Absolutely.
I love that idea. Another thing that you pointed out, which I think is really a necessary conversation that we don't have, is we have no idea of the cues of what's going to be out there. We have no forecasting or predictive models, right? And I get the idea that we have to be protective of competitive rights of where somebody might be installing a new facility line and they want to protect that for whatever revenue possibilities. But the reality of it is a lot of these excavators, contractors know where they're going to be digging and are planning that ahead of time, but we just don't have access to that data. You know, we have a tool now that's called 811 Spotter that had a vision that it could queue the workloads, and then we could see that to help make a broader estimate of what helps. So that way contract locators could staff appropriately, because it's hard to have a fiber project come into town, and your letter so eloquently points out, it takes 4 to 6 months to get somebody actually really trained to be able to do that. You can't do that if you find out on Tuesday that there's a new fiber thing going in.
And again, you know, take a little bit of responsibility for that. We've done a very poor job of educating even our clients on what it takes to create a single competent locator. You know, you have advertisements everywhere. Hey, we'll come out in 2 days and train your locators. I've done that. I've trained people in 2 days, but it's not 2 days you're a competent locator. It's 2 days you have the introduction into locating, and now you have to go find your way and develop that. So we've done a bad job with that. I'm reminded of a major phone company that made a big change to their contract locator. And the thought was that the new contract locator would take all the old guys' stuff, you know, their people, and go on. Didn't happen. Get a call from this VP saying, hey, Ron, I want you to come up here to wherever, and I want you to train us 100 locators. Can you have them in the field in 2 weeks? I'm like, this is not a conversation, because we're not going to do that. You can't do that. They didn't value what we did. We've done a bad job with that. We need to do better with that. The other piece of that, though, with the forecasting is many of our clients, they know what's coming down the road. Like you said, the competitive edge, they don't want to put that out there. Yet they have non-disclosures with us and confidentiality agreements with us. Look, tell us what's coming in 6 to 9 months. Then I can staff appropriately. I'm not going to go tell your competition, hey, we're going to run fiber over here, but I'm going to staff for it. If we had that level of agreement, and that's in the papers, with that utility member, that utility client of ours, that would change things dramatically as well. We have done a fair job, this is prior to this whole fiber thing, we've done a fairly good job of forecasting over the years, generally speaking. BEAD and that's coming, and what's been done with the fiber overbuilds now, it's just blown that out of the water. And especially since a lot of it is in rural areas. You know, you're bringing in 30 crews where we had one locator, you know, and okay, reallocate your staff. Well, that sounds really nice, but none of the work went away in the urban areas. So the better we can forecast by being told what's coming, the better we can be. And we do have some issues with retention, with recruiting. We're aware of that. We're taking steps to fix that. But man, you give me 9 months, I'll have a staff.
Yeah.
You know.
You know, what's interesting is as we sit here at the CGA and we're talking about 50 and 5 and all those things, one of the things that I always find interesting is the lack of the economic discussion around this. I think 50 and 5 is a tremendous idea. I could make 50 and 5 happen if I had an unlimited budget. When I first got into the industry, probably a little later than you, but not much, unfortunately, we used to have a lot of like pipeline engineers who also located the line, right? A very expensive locate asset, but also one that was very knowledgeable of their job, knew it well. And we saw a model that prevented damages. It's an expensive model. It's an investment model to say, hey, this is what I'm doing. And obviously gas lines are going to be doing that. I always scratch my head a little and wonder if we kind of undervalued the job of the contract locator, and we lowered this as a commodity now. And so we don't really have access to the funds that could help us invest to properly train, properly deploy technology, because the volumes have grown so much, but our spend has actually decreased on that. So part of a challenge as I sit here and say, how do we get more money into this? Because if we want to promote safety, we know what that means. We know being safer means less damages, less downtime, less liability and contracts. So we could actually lower the cost of operation over the course of time if we could reduce the damages. But we have to convince people to reach to their wallets and take care of our contract locators. And sometimes I would argue that our contract locators are our worst enemy because they negotiate at such a low level on some of these deals that they've reduced the funds for the overall process of damage prevention. So how do we convince them to A, invest more, and how do we convince the stakeholders to spend more because it's better for them in the long run? How do you pull that off?
That is the multi-million-dollar question because as you well know, and our paper points this out, my industry has been in a steady race to the bottom. Nothing good happens at the bottom.
Nothing.
But we've done it. We've done it to ourselves to an extent. That with the devaluation of what we do. I mean, look, in a lot of cases, we're an insurance policy from somebody, which actually never really works when something catastrophic happens because everybody's getting sued anyway.
Right,
but that's kind of how it's perceived. So we have to add value to what a locating technician should be a profession. And that's part of the problem is right now it's not. It's a job on the way to something. Most of the time with our utility clients or the excavators that pay more. But money from pay for the locators isn't the only issue. I know tons of people that love locating, but we put them in bad positions. You know, if I give you 100 tickets today, you can do 20, and you're getting 75 more tomorrow, and you can do 20. What's the stress level? You're going to burn out in a hurry. If we give you the work you want, look, I love locating. I'd be locating today if I had my way. I love going out there. It's fun, but we don't do that. But our clients have to value that. I'd love to tell you that every gas client values that. Now I will tell you the transmission guys, mostly who do it inside, by inside, so they value that.
Absolutely.
It's because what happens if one miss, it's catastrophic. Most others, if you're regulated, you value it because you have to. But do they really value, all these people value? No, it's just, who cares? And any time that your customer is evaluating you based on accounting, there's a problem. There's a problem.
Very good point.
And so now we back to the same old problem. How do we convince our clients that we're worth more? How do we convince our clients to spend more money on mapping? Every contract I've seen with locating has some, and it's a horrible thing in there, but it's a provision that says prints are only a guide.
Right.
No, and I've had people actually criticize us. Well, prints are only a guide. They shouldn't be.
Right.
Prints ought to be. And there are some very, very good utilities that have great maps.
Right.
And they're very public. I mean, look, you can get on Marathon's site right now and see exactly where their stuff is. So why aren't we doing that everywhere?
I'm telling you, you're making a perfect point, because one of the things that we look at is communication, I think, solves a lot of this. You fundamentally say, the system isn't failing. The system is doing exactly as it was designed for 1 million tickets. Now we scale this up. It's really going to create the challenges we're facing today. one of the things with boots on the ground is we're collecting great data, right? And so one of the byproducts of a really good functioning damage prevention industry to me is an incredible insight into the data of this industry. Tells you so much more. It has value to the construction industries, it has value to the insurance industries and all of this. But we kind of limit ourselves by putting these false barriers up to protect this data. And we don't invite audiences to sit that play a vital role in this. We don't have the contractors have enough voice in this, the excavating community. Our contract locators are looked at as enemies instead.
Right.
We have multiple state laws that change. So you're locating and you just cross an imaginary border and all of a sudden the rules change over here. So as I've sat in for many years in this and said, how would I fix this thing? I have my own vision how I would start from scratch. I'm curious if you ever have those thoughts and what that model might look like for you.
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, the first thing, I would have uniformity in one-call laws. I'm not a national one-call law guy. I don't want the feds in my business. But why can't our one-calls agree on something simple like a tolerance zone or a wait time on a ticket? Or we can't. You know, we have 50 some odd little fiefdoms, and it appears that thou shalt not interfere with my kingdom. Or the other part is, oh, we're different. Right? You know, my grandfather used to have a saying, you're unique, just like everybody else. Get over it, you know? And we need to get that uniformity going. We need those basic guidelines, realizing there are some differences.
Yeah, sure.
I'm probably not going to worry about, you know, subaqueous locating in Oklahoma,
Right.
But in Florida and Minnesota, it probably means something.
Absolutely.
So we've got to get that. You know, man, if I could just magically infuse value into my clients to say, wow, this is important, we need to do this. Maybe there's a shift in where that money comes from within their systems, as opposed to an expense or a maintenance cost. Is it part of the capital investment that changes and I'm not an economist, but does that change the dynamic on how the money is spent? Maybe. I don't know. I think that's worth exploring. But if I could just infuse the probability of hey, we value what these people do.
Right.
You know, private equity has its place. You know, I struggle with the how would we say, the outlook of a private equity firm is we're going to buy this, we're going to lean it up for 3 to 5 years, and then we're going to move it to the next group that does the same thing.
Sure.
Where's your continuity of business and values?
Right.
And I think that in some cases is lost. Now I see some positive things coming out of some of the private equity held companies and trying to realize that look, I wouldn't have a paper if my members didn't say, hey, we're behind this, let's go. So I think there's some positives there, but there are all kinds of dynamics pulling at the strings of this thing.
Yeah, I think it's for us, for many years we operated as this is our little industry. And we said, hey, we all know each other, we're all that. But I always felt like we really couldn't advance this unless we had more economics to be enticing to the outside world to come in, because you can really only grow and invest when you have real money involved. So for us, I agree with you. The private equity groups have been interesting. We saw them come in, we see them invest, we see them trying to pair damage prevention with other avenues that are similar, other verticals, whether it's integrity, pipeline integrity, or lots of different things. So I like that, and I like the exposure we're getting. My compelling argument is the data that comes out of this industry, if we just all worked together, for example, if we could really have a foundationally good system for damages. While I respect the desire of dirt, foundationally, I can't build really good algorithms or anything off of it because I don't trust it, right? It's because you might put in one subject, I might put in a competing subject, and I really don't have an end result that I can trust. So I think part of the communication to advance us as an industry has to be the word that you said at the very beginning is trust. And I think we have to reset and say, I trust the guy on the other part of this process wants the same result I do. Like, I want to be safe. I want to go out and know that when I'm going to work, it's ready in a safe environment for me. I don't want to think that the guy had to manage 900 other tickets before that did never get looked at. I want to trust that the data that's in the system is valuable, because later I can build upon that. As you were saying, the map should be accurate. Like, we should have a communication where somebody wants to put something on the ground, they can look into a system and see what's there. And if it's not identified, why isn't it? And why aren't we putting the onus of making sure everything's identifiable very accurately? Because then we could treat our locators better. Because then we could say, here's your job, here's the accurate data, please do the physical part of this for us. And I think that's a better system. But we have to build trust. And the question I keep scratching my head on as a guy that's tried to solve this for many years is to say, do the tools we have in place allow that? I don't know. I want to believe that they do, but I think that we need more voices, and I'm concerned that as we add more voices, we don't have a system that allows them to be heard equally. And that, to me, is the biggest challenge that we're facing. And I don't think you can face these unless you start asking the questions. So I really think what you did was outstanding. I've heard more in my time this conversation than I ever have in 25 years. And it's a shame because we're 4 years into the 50 and 5. This conversation, if you ask me, should have been had the year before we said 50 and 5, because then we could actually start doing this. And then how do we even make sure we're getting there right now? So with all of these questions, I have one that CJ and my team's been asking everybody that's been sitting in this seat. What keeps you up at night that makes you concerned for the next 1 to 2 years? And then maybe a little further out in 5 years. What's your biggest concern? And then what's your desire to see change in the next few years?
Yeah, my concern, and it was amplified this time last year, is some lapse by our industry leading to somebody dying. You know, unfortunately, the gas explosion in Lexington, Missouri last year, that happened 500 feet from the house I grew up in. I played in these people's backyards when I was a kid, even though that was 6 decades ago. And before that, and I'd been to tons of explosions and damages, a few electrocutions, you know, all the bad stuff. As much as I wanted to say it was personal, it never was personal. That one hit home. Yeah. I mean, that explosion blew my cousin and his wife off their feet. You know, they came out, and fortunately they were part of saving the little girl and the father's life. That hit home. Sure. That gave my drive, and that's what keeps me up at night. And it's thinking that lapses in our system, whether it's a locator lapse, a mapping lapse, an attention to detail on the part of a company, that's what keeps me up at night, short term, probably long term as well. What gives me hope is that that, you know, and I hate that somebody has to die or somebody has to get hurt for things to change. It's what seems to happen in our industry. Nothing happens unless something really bad happens, and then we all scramble to see what we can do. I told the Missouri legislator 2 years ago, we went in thinking we had this law passed, and found out there was opposition in the 11th hour, even though we had this great coalition. So instead of having 2 minutes to talk about the advantages of this bill, by the time it got to me, they said, you had 30 seconds. And I said, well, you know, okay, great. So my 30 seconds was this, and because I have a little bit of a safety background, I said, OSHA regulations are said to be built off blood. They're written in blood because somebody died or got hurt before something was changed. Don't let your one call law be written in blood. And like, wow, dang, that was actually profound. Where the hell did that come from? You know, who said that? So, and then we went away, and unfortunately, now that law didn't pass. The passing of it happened 1 week after the explosion in Lexington. That explosion caused that law to pass. In fairness, that law would not have changed anything that happened that day. Sure. But that law is written in blood. Absolutely. We can't let them be written in blood. We have to be proactive to do it. So that keeps me up. The hope is that we have technology out there. We have the ability to do stuff, but people will recognize it and take it by the horn, bull by the horns. I mean, at any day, you know, I have somewhere between 30 and 40,000 member technicians out there locating. Those locators now have the ability to map. You know, we have RTK technology that we never had, you know, way back in the day. We have the ability, if somebody wants it, to really improve mapping. You know, we have the ability to do lots of great things with technology, whether it's ticket management, contractor management, you know, 811 spotter, love it. Good job. You know, we have the ability on all these facets to use technology to improve what we do. We got to use it. Yes. And people have to want to see the future. And I hope, you know, I hope that leads to something. But yeah, the bad stuff keeps me up at night for sure. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting you said this, and we were talking about this earlier. It seems like, it seems like the CGA would be the appropriate place to do this, but it seems like you should have, let's start from scratch conversation, and let's get everybody in the room. Let's get the excavating community. Let's get the contractors community. Let's get the locating community. Let's get the one cultures. Let's all sit down and say, you know, no handcuffs. Let's start fresh and have the conversation, and let's everybody respect each other's voice at the table. Because if we could communicate collectively in one single environment, I think that's how you reduce damages by 50% or more in the future. It seems like at least your letter started to begin this conversation more. I would implore you to do that more, to speak more like that. And I hope other groups will see the advantages of speaking out. So maybe we can rally along with the CGA to begin these conversations as a group to say, what could we build? What could be the right communication vehicle for all the parties to do this? And what advantages and disadvantages are there compared to the system we have today? I've tried to say this, and I don't want to get up on a soapbox, but from a technology side, the ability to forget what's behind you and move forward and build something new can sometimes open up amazing doors.
Oh, absolutely.
And so sometimes I look and say, we've been putting Band-Aids on now for about 30 years. Because you're right, our biggest advancement at first was we replaced a fax machine. And then we brought a map in. If you came to this conference and attended it, I don't think there was a session that didn't have AI written in it this time. And my question is, all this great stuff, but are we just making AI Band-Aids? Or are we actually going to evolve the conversation to build something better? And I hope that's where it takes us. And I also don't think those conversations don't happen unless you and people like you speak up. So I think I love the letter. I love the second follow-up. I thought it had pertinent facts on it. So as we wrap this up, what is the one thing you want to get across to the CGA and the committees that are listening to say, this is how I want the locating, contracting voice to be heard?
Yeah, good question. You're making me think, Jason.
Good, all right, this works.
You know, you're right, number one. This is the vehicle. All the stakeholders are here. We're doing that. You know, we wrote the letters with intent. I didn't write them we didn't write them, no, I didn't write them. I'd love to tell you I wrote those and those were my perfect words. And I've had people ask me, like, we didn't think you were smart enough to write that letter. Well, I'm not. I had a professional. So, but we wrote those with intent to get the conversations. We've got to get the conversations moving. And it can't be, you know, we have the ability to make change. Unfortunately, I think our culture is so resistant to change. I'm looking at what other people are doing, and I'll throw Alberta out there right now with the, USP, their deal. They have an alternative locate process. It's not mandatory, but you can do it, and they're having phenomenal results. We've got what's going on in Australia. You know, Australia, one of the cool things they're doing, besides a little bit different way, they're building a national mapping system. You know, they're through with hearing, this is, you know, terrorism and national security, you know, bull. It's you know, again, if I want to be a terrorist, I'll just go call in a locate if I want to know where your stuff is.
Exactly right.
So, you know, they're overcoming some of that. We need to, and I'm not saying we rewrite the system, but we need to be willing to come in there and have that honest conversation and start from scratch. I would love to have that. When you go into that thing, if we're taking down all the shields, tell me what we need to do better. Maybe I'm a little too close to this as the locating guy. I want to hear what people think we can do better besides, just hire more locators. Yeah, great, love to.
Right, absolutely.
Love to do that.
Right.
But I think we have to start having look, what was it, 1997, 98, we did the Common Ground study. You know, there were a lot of walls broken down there. We need to do that again on a much more, let's tear this thing down to the, you know, while everything's functioning, let's still tear down the concepts and start from scratch. Let's see where we go. What do we do? I think that's the only way we make substantive change, because we're just going to keep band-aiding if we don't do something. And you know, are we going to get anything better than what we've got? No, not if we keep throwing band-aids on stuff. But I do think the technology exists to make it better. I do think there may be a growing willingness to have those conversations, and why not do it here where everybody's here anyway?
Absolutely.
So, you know, so.
Hey, this is the right place to do it. I really agree.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for sitting down with us. This was perfect.
Yeah.
This was, I thought, would be a really nice way to get your message out in a broader format. But I also just want to have the conversation with you. 'Cause I was super intrigued by this, and I could probably go on for hours, but I'm just not going to do that to you today.
As you can tell, I probably could too, but I appreciate the opportunity for sure, and look for more to come. You know, we've pointed out some flaws. Now, one of our next steps is, what are we doing about our problems? So you will see more about that coming forward.
I love the accountability. I mean,
it's got to.
You got to. It's such a good way. You say, hey, I'm not only going to tell you what I think, I'm going to do what I'm trying to say.
And then we're going to invite everybody else to do the same.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
Hey, on that note, let's end this. That was great.
Very good.
This is Jason coming live from the Broadmoor at the CGA. Thank you so much, Ron, for joining us today. Thanks for listening to the Irth Podcast.